Hey, I'm Tamara Kandaker, and you're listening to The Decibel from the Globe and Mail. So last month, the conflict between Israel and Hamas ended with a ceasefire after 11 straight days of violence and hundreds of people dead, and the situation's still very fragile. One of the sources of tension, if you'll remember, was a court decision that was expected to order Palestinian families to leave their homes in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in favor of Jewish settlers. That decision was postponed, but it's expected to come down soon, and a similar situation's playing out in the district of Silwan, which is close by. Palestinians have been protesting in anticipation of the court rulings. There have also been reports of Israeli police arresting Palestinians in East Jerusalem and Arabs all over Israel in an effort to clamp down on a surge in activism. That's all to say, tensions are high. The Globe's European bureau chief, Eric Reguli, is on the ground now, and he's been reporting on what's happening in these neighborhoods in the midst of a pivotal moment in Israeli politics. On Sunday, there's an important vote in Israel's parliament, which could finally bring to an end the era of Benjamin Netanyahu.
What unites these 8 parties is their desire to see Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been Prime Minister for 12 years, out of the picture.
Today on The Decibel, the latest from Silwan and Sheikh Jarrah and what a new government could mean for this very delicate peace. Eric, hello.
Hello, Tamara.
So Eric, the last time we talked about Israel on this show was in the aftermath of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, which came after 11 days of fighting. Can we start by having you briefly catch us up on what has happened since then?
Well, against all odds, the ceasefire has held. Now, in the last war in 2014, which lasted 50 days, there were many ceasefires, and which none of them held until the last one held. Against all odds, the first ceasefire held here. And so it's tense in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm. And when you say tense, what do you mean?
Well, it's tense, especially in East Jerusalem, in the sense that the evictions of Palestinian families from 2 areas. One is called Silwan, the other one is Sheikh Jarrah. These evictions are before the district court in Jerusalem, and there could be a whole new series of evictions next month in July. There have been many evictions so far as the Jewish settlers move in. And there are protests, every few days in both neighborhoods. They're very tense in the sense that there's a big Israeli police presence, Israeli soldiers, the settlers are armed, the police are armed, the soldiers are armed. I mean, it could be very peaceful. It could turn very violent. Just don't know.
Mm-hmm. And can you describe what the mood is there on the ground right now and what kinds of conversations you've had with people so far in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood?
In Sheikh Jarrah, I was there all day yesterday, and with my fixer and my photographer, and it was a really intense, quite emotional day for all of us. There are several settler families there. I mean, their houses are obvious. They're surrounded by barbed wire. They have Israeli flags from the front, waving from the front. There's Stars of David everywhere. So it's very provocative. We tried to talk to many settlers coming in and out. None of them would talk to us at all, though we tried very, very hard. We did talk to several Palestinian families, and the theme was that they feel helpless. They say the Israeli law is entirely rigged against them. They fully expect to get evicted at some time. I talked to 2 families who have been fighting for their homes for 50 years. I mean, 50 years. The one house, the most prominent house, which is occupied by the settlers now, they're not welcome, obviously, by the Palestinian community. They don't try to become part of it. The Palestinians there complain that the settlers are abusive, that they get kicked by them, that they get pepper sprayed by them. I actually have video of this. During Ramadan, there was a street dinner, and it turned ugly after a while. And when I say Palestinian families, these are not just, they're not like, 3 or 4 of them. I mean, there was one family I interviewed where there are 3 generations in one house. There are something like 15 or 20 of them in this one house. And now their appeal could be delayed to buy them some time, but they feel that the momentum is very much in favor of the settlers. The law is very much in favor of the settlers. And there's not much they can do about it.
Right. And these people that you spoke to, where would they go if they were forced to leave their homes?
Well, a few years ago, the Palestinians who were forced out of the house I was describing, the one that's on the main street, surrounded by barbed wire and waving flags, that family was pushed out in the street, and they lived in a tent for 6 months right across the street. And eventually they found rented housing somewhere in East Jerusalem. I don't know. That was several years ago. Where would they go? I don't know. I mean, that's what they all ask. Where are we going to go? I mean, it's not like they have a lot of money. It's not like rents are cheap in this city. But the Jewish families claim they have an historic right to these areas. The Palestinian families say they have an historic right to these areas. They're worried about, the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, by definition, are United Nations classified refugees from 1948 or 1967. And they worry about being refugees once again, in other words, losing their homes and being faced to find accommodation, and it won't be easy.
Yeah. So you also talked to Muna Al-Kurd, who's the twin sister of Mohammed Al-Kurd, and their family is one of the families that's facing eviction in Sheikh Jarrah. And they've really been leading the fight against these evictions. They've kind of become the faces of that fight. So what was it like talking to her? What did she tell you?
I met her Wednesday afternoon. It was late in the afternoon on a really hot day. She was really pleasant. She's 23. She's has 1.5 million Instagram followers, 180,000 Twitter followers. I mean, she looks very young. I mean, she's tall and skinny, and she seems like a student. And yet at the same time, she has figured out social media, and she's made a huge impact. She and her brother, I would say more so her, have become the face of the resistance in Sheikh Jarrah. She seemed a bit tired to me in the sense that, since the war started in early May, she has been the center of global media attention. I mean, it's just, every journalist wants an interview with her. She's been, at every protest. So she did seem a bit tired to me, a bit weary. But at the same time, you could sense a real fight in her. And she made me laugh at one point. I mean, listen, it wasn't a long interview. I mean, I had maybe, 10, 15 minutes with her. But the interesting thing about her life is that on her property, her family's property, part of her house is occupied by settlers. They actually share a wall. And I said, "What's that like?" And she said, "Well, I call him the honest settler." And that surprised me. I go, "What do you mean by that?" She said, "Because he's honest why he's there. She said, he told me that, yes, I stole this property, but I didn't steal this property. Someone else would." And in a funny way, she appreciated that honesty. And actually got a video clip of that, which went viral. So she's, she's not making that up.
Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? What are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
It's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي.
I think she did appreciate the brutal, savage honesty of her neighbor, who is, on what she says is our property, being direct and honest about it. Then she disappeared inside.
Mm-hmm. And so you were also in Silwan, which is another district in East Jerusalem where a similar situation's playing out. Can you tell me what you saw there?
Silwan was depressing for me in the sense that Silwan is a very hilly, impossibly packed, very poor neighborhood on the other side of the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. And there are actually more settlements there than there are in Sheikh Jarrah. And there's a very heavy Israeli police and army presence there. They have guard towers. The settler families, when they leave with guards. These are private guards that escort them wherever they go, whether it's for shopping, whether it's to take the kids to school, whether it's to escort the kids to a taxi. The settler families are under tight escort to protect them. There are more settlements there than in Sheikh Jarrah, and there are more potential evictions there. So that area is a ticking time bomb, probably more so than Sheikh Jarrah. And depending on what happens in the district court in July, this area could blow. So again, there was a sense of the Palestinians I talked to, and most were very happy to talk to me. There was a sense of despair and inevitability that some of them, maybe not all, some of them would lose their homes.
Mm-hmm. And you said that settler families are being escorted by private guards to protect them. Protect them from what? Is there an actual threat of violence against these families? Yes, because the Palestinians don't want them there for obvious reasons. They think they say this is their neighborhood, that they own these properties, though many of them can't prove they own the properties. It's hard to say who provokes who. I've heard, according to the settlers, reports from the settlers, I should say, because again, I got to stress, I tried many times to talk to the settlers. They would not give me an interview, that it's the Palestinians who are being provocative. The Palestinians say it's the Jewish settlers are being provocative. So we're talking on Thursday, and everything we're talking about is happening against a very complicated political backdrop. So there's an important vote happening in Israel's parliament this Sunday, and Benjamin Netanyahu may finally be ousted as the prime minister after 12 years in power. So can you tell me about the coalition that is potentially coming in to replace him and the kind of impact the new government could have on these eviction cases?
The new government, which seems likely to come in by about midnight on Sunday after the Knesset vote, is composed of 8 parties. The parties range from leftist anti-settlement parties to centrist liberal parties to very far right pro-settler parties. They have nothing ideologically in common whatsoever, which could doom it down the road. What unites these 8 parties is their desire to see Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been prime minister for 12 years, out of the picture. They don't like him. They don't trust him. He's undergoing a corruption trial. So they've just had enough of this man. They want him out. So one of the unique aspects of this coalition is that it's being supported by an Arab party called the United Arab List. And it's why are they joining? Because they'd rather be inside the tent than out. Inside the tent, they think they can squeeze a new government for money for the integration of the Bedouin towns in the Negev and southern Israel, money for Arab society, money for Arab infrastructure. So that's why the Arab List has said it will vote in favor of the coalition and the new government. There are other Arab parties who think that's a complete sellout, that to have an Arab party supporting a government whose Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, used to represent the settler party, is very pro-settlement. He's very anti-Palestinian state, is a complete sellout and a dishonor to the Palestinians in general. So even though there is one Arab party supporting this new government, there are other Arab parties, small ones, that are not and are quite appalled by this.
Right. And so Naftali Bennett, like you mentioned, he used to be the leader of the pro-settler party, Jewish Home, and he led the Israeli settler movement in the West Bank. So him being the prime minister, what do you think that could mean for Palestinians living in Israel and in the occupied territories?
Well, I don't think much will change because, Benjamin Netanyahu had pretty much the same philosophy. Look at the settlements that were built under Bibi's reign. The settlements, they just exploded in the West Bank. So this new government is not a policy government in the sense that you're not going to see a lot of change. Its sole purpose at the onset is to get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. Then it's got to get a budget in place. There hasn't been a budget in about 3 years here. They have to deal with the aftermath of a pandemic. No one I talk to, Israel's done a very good job on the pandemic. 2/3 of Israelis are vaccinated. But no one I talked to thought there would be any major policy change vis-a-vis the Palestinians, maybe forever with this new government. It's just not on the agenda. You're not going to, everyone I talked to said they don't expect to see a revival of the peace process, which has been stalled for years. Palestinians, when I ask them, is it going to be better or worse for you? They say, doesn't matter. They shrug. It's, as far as they're concerned, it's a continuation of the same policy.
Yeah, because this is such an ideologically diverse coalition of parties, it seems like it's going to be pretty hard for them to come together on anything. And it seems like the one thing that they're united on is their desire to get rid of Bibi, right? So staying in power, from what I understand, would really help Netanyahu, or he thinks that it would help him because from what I understand, he would try to introduce this law that would make the prosecution of a sitting prime minister impossible. And this is why we're seeing very desperate attempts from him to break this coalition, right? I think you've done some reporting on this. Can you tell me about what he's doing ahead of this vote?
Well, he's trying to find, one or two Knesset members to defect from the coalition, which would blow up the coalition and trigger a new election. Mm-hmm. Enormous pressure is coming on some Knesset members. When I'm using the passive voice here, because I don't think Netanyahu or anyone else would say I ordered, protesters to go mm-hmm. to the house of Knesset members who I think are making a huge mistake supporting this new government when they should be supporting me. But there's no doubt, however those protesters are going to outside of the house of these Knesset members who they think are betraying Netanyahu by voting in favor of the coalition. There's no doubt that these Knesset members, there's, 6 or 7 of them, who are very afraid, and the security among these 6 or 7 and in front of their house has been boosted dramatically in recent days because a few of them have received death threats. So this is what's going on here in Israeli. But this is a man, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is desperate to keep his job. And I would say that most people I interviewed think the new coalition will succeed in forming a government. No one is absolutely certain. In Israel, Netanyahu is known as the political magician.
Yeah. If the coalition does manage to oust Netanyahu, what can we expect to see in the short term? Like, what can we expect to see in Israel next week?
On Tuesday, there was supposed to be a flag-waving protest, the Israeli nationalists. If it goes ahead, there's some chance this protest could be canceled. That could be yet another flashpoint. It also depends on the route. If the route goes through Damascus Gate, the entrance to the Muslim quarter, it could trigger, mass protests against this march. So I think Tuesday is a day to look out for. It could be very peaceful. It could be violent. No one knows right now. There's some chance this march will be canceled. Netanyahu, so far as Prime Minister, is allowing this march to go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that's surprised you since you arrived in Jerusalem that we haven't really seen reported in international coverage of the situation?
This process has been going on for decades, but there's a sense that the effort to remove Palestinian families from these two neighborhoods is accelerating and will keep accelerating, and that the greater plan is to remove them entirely from East Jerusalem. So what surprised me was the sense of sadness, I must say, that the sense that no one's going to protect them. The international community is not going to become in their favor. That Joe Biden or Justin Trudeau are not going to parachute in and say stop. But the main thing I felt was is the fear that their homes are going to be taken away from them pretty soon. Mm-hmm. Because this is in the Western media, in the North American, European media, the story never changes, right? It's been the same story since 1967. It just keeps on going and going and going. And my father covered the Middle East for 3 years for the Toronto Star, and I've written a book about my father, which is coming out in the autumn. And his name was Robert Reguly. He died 10 years ago. And when I was researching my book, I went through the Toronto Star archives, and I read every one of his stories he wrote about the Middle East between 1969 and the end of 1972. And he had dozens of trips to the Middle East, Egypt, Cyprus, Israel, Jordan, all throughout the Middle East. He's very well connected there and loved these trips. And what struck me reading these stories as I was trying to recreate his life during those 3 years, he was a very famous journalist, was how the headlines haven't changed. He wrote a series, which I thought was wonderful, about 4 Palestinian refugee camps. They were in Jordan, Lebanon, I can't remember where else. I think most of them are in Jordan and Lebanon. And those 4 refugee camps are still there today. Nothing has changed in 50 years. The headlines have not changed in 50 years. So, I'm here on the streets of East Jerusalem, and I'm wondering, what are my editors going to think in Toronto? How am I going to write a story that's going to look different from a story that was written by my father 50 years ago, or by other reporters 10 years ago, or 20 years ago? There's a weariness in right. North America and in Europe about the plight of the Palestinians. I mean, does anyone care anymore? I don't know. I don't think anyone does. But I think something has changed on the ground now. And what has changed is the sense of unity among the Palestinians in the three areas, that they have nothing to lose now, that they have to use social media, that they have to bring themselves together. They have to make it a youth movement that'll resonate across the world. Will it work? I don't know. Probably not. But that's what I think's changed. You didn't see that 50 years ago. My father was covering the Middle East. You didn't see it 10 years ago. If anyone's going to change anything now, it's the young Palestinians.
Eric, thank you so much, and good luck with your reporting.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Tamara Kandaker. Our producers are Madeline White and Kasia Mihailovich. David Crosby edits the show. Angela Pacenza is our executive editor. Thank you so much to Eric Reguli. You can find him on Twitter at ereguli. If you liked this episode, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We're a new show, so it really, really helps. If you want to reach us, email us at thedecibel@theglobeandmail.com. You can also tweet me at anima_TK. And if you don't already, make sure you hit follow wherever you're listening to this so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.